hanging out at the El Cortez, and it got later and later. And then I discovered there's like three or four more guys with the same idea. So we just kind of wandered around until after midnight, 1, and finally Sheldorf comes up to us. He says, you know, you guys can't just wander around the hotel all night, but I made an arrangement for you guys to stay in this room that has 2 doors opening it, and you can just close them and sleep there tonight. So that's what we did. And one of the guys had a flask, you know, full of booze. So we were all drinking it. 17 years old, you know, what did I know? I got kind of high, and in the morning I was kind of hungover. So when I went to the dealer's room, you know, I just was not enthusiastic about trying to sell comic books. So I took my tablecloths and put them so that they covered completely to the floor. And I just crawled under with a wadded up one and for a pillow. And I just laid down there and went to sleep. And then my future partner, David Alexander, woke me up. He goes, don't you want to go to this Lanning's bookstore? And this is something we'd heard about. It was this store in San Diego that had tons of coverless comic books from the 50s. And they were only $0.25 each. So yeah, I wanted to go. You know, so I raised myself from the dead, and we went down there. And sure enough, there are all these great comic books, you know. Not EC ones, but like Atlas ones with the EC artists. And all these other just fantastic. Pretty soon I had a stack of like 50, then 100. And then I realized, geez, my hangover's completely gone. It was the best hangover cure I've ever experienced. So when I got back to the dealer's room, I just sat at my booth with this big stack of comics, reading Brain Bats from Venus, this classic Wolverton story. And I was just so happy that one of the older dealers, you know, says, you look like the cat that ate the canary. And that's how I felt, you know, really great like that.
Thanks, Terry. Anthony, sorry I don't have any pictures of you from the 70s and olden days, but you were 12 back then, right, or 10?
I didn't have any change from Comic-Con. I came for the free water. That's all. I was just trying to think of what would be the best example of the journey that I took starting at 12 years of age. My older brother here said that there was this convention and it was about comics, and I loved reading comics. So I went with him in '73 when I was 11, and I think I just went for one day. I think my mom would only let me go for one day. And I loved it. It was just so amazing. So I asked him the next year, this was at the El Cortez, in '74, I asked him when I was 12 if I could come down there and volunteer, and he said, sure. So I made the assumption that at that time he was working with Clayton here, and he would go around with his Sony, my dad's Sony camera, and Clayton would interview the guests, and I thought I'd get to be hanging with them doing that. So we get down to the El Cortez and we go in, and I say, so what are we gonna do? And he goes, we're not doing anything. And he takes me over to a man named Gene Henderson, if people here in the room remember Gene. And he said, you're working for him. And that's how I started working for Gene Henderson from 12 until I was 27 when I took over security my last year at Comic-Con, when Gene went to work for Tom and Virginia French in the dealer's room. And then the next year he went back to being director of security. But I think the big evolution in my mind was thinking that at 12 years old, I could never, ever have imagined that 46 years later, in 2019, I would end up sponsoring and hosting the 50th anniversary party for Comic-Con in the original ballroom at the U.S. Grant Hotel. That was just mind-blowing that the evolution over all those years came to that fruition. But the in-between part, there's far, far too many stories to tell, simply because working as director of security, well, I started as night security, and then, well, no, excuse me, I started just regular security, and then director of night security, and then I became director of special security, which was all the guests. And that was the most interesting time, because if anybody wants to take a guess at what one celebrity was the only one back in the day when everyone was a volunteer, it wasn't paid security like we have today. Only one guest that I ever dealt with demanded to have 2 security people. Can anybody guess who that was? You got it. William Shatner. He was the only one that ever requested that. Now, along that same vein, there was Masquerade. Well, we were invited, big mistake, from the Hotel U.S. Grant on Broadway in San Diego. They invited us back. They had been closed for 5 years to do a $50 million renovation. And they invited us back in '80 to come back to their hotel. They had just amazing carpets and pictures, paintings. I think that whoever management was had no concept of the people they were inviting back there. So to give you some idea of how that went, besides the throwing up, you know, from the young people throwing up on that beautiful carpet day and night while the convention was going on and drawing on some of the pictures, I think the one that kind of stood out the most was I got called up to a room. I got called up to a floor because they said that there was furniture out in the hallway, and this was late at night. It didn't make any sense. So I go up and I find out that these, I think it was 2 or 3 of these kids that were in a room, they decided to play a joke on their friend. They took every scrap of furniture and put it out in the hallway. The bed, the mattress, it was just all piled up out in the hallway. And again, this is $50 million renovation this hotel did, and then invited Comic-Con back. So that was not too wise, and Comic-Con never went back again after that, by the way. They never let Comic-Con back in after that. But thinking along the vein of Shatner, there's another celebrity that was well known. Yeah, my brother's mooing over here. There's another celebrity that's well known for his ego. He passed away a few years back. Anybody want to take a guess? Think Shatner and then think of another one.
Harlan Ellison.
No, Nimoy was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. Absolutely loved him. I remember riding up in the elevator and having a wonderful conversation with him when I was taking him to his room. Yeah, Adam West is a jerk. Okay. So yeah, Adam West. So my brother was filming that year. We went back to the year we went back to the U.S. Grant. We had Adam West as the host of our masquerade. So he's up there, he's got his tuxedo. My brother was filming, I was doing security, running the security, and my brother asked me if I would help him pack up the equipment as quickly as possible because we only had just less than an hour to go change and then go to what we used to have a award dinner. They used to do a combination award dinner. So the video room was right outside of the main ballroom at the U.S. Grant on the first floor. So I was helping my brother pack up after the masquerade. We're trying to hurry so we can go change, and I feel a tap on my shoulder. And I turn around, and who is it? Adam West. And he says, I saw what you were doing. I'd like to see that. So my brother said, oh, I'd be happy to send you a VHS or Betamax. Yes, there was Betamax at that time. He said, I'd be happy to send you a copy. And I'll never forget the words that came out of West's mouth. I meant now. He wanted to see himself for what he just did right then. And of course, we couldn't say no. So we had him follow us back to the video room. And the way the room was, the door opened, there's a wall in front of you. So you had to go right or left. If you went to the right, there was another door. And in there is where my brother was running, I don't know how many VHS and betas that he had tied into the hotel. So he had a program, and he'd run all these different movies. Around the corner on the other end was a square room with just like a high school TV stand, 25-inch TV, and a couple chairs. I sat there for an hour, almost an hour, while Adam West watched himself from having just done this masquerade. He was already in the tuxedo. All he had to do was get up. He walked out the door and went right into the dinner. My brother and I had to go up to rooms, change. By the time we got down, we missed dinner. So I don't have great memories of him.
We got rolls.
Yeah, we got rolls. But anyway, there was so many of those kind of stories. In fact, when Greg was putting Kirk Allen up there, he reminded me that just so many stories and opportunities that came up because of being a volunteer at Comic-Con, which I highly recommend. I went to get Kirk Allen, how many people know who Kirk Allen was? Okay, for those of you that don't, he was the serial Superman. They used to do serials when you went to the movies, and you'd see they keep you on suspense, until next week. You see whether Superman's going to live or not, because the kryptonite ray is coming at him. So I went to put him, cliffhanger. So I went to put him in his seat for signing, and just because of the way things work, this is when we were at the convention center in San Diego. He ended up, I sat him next to the man who played the detective on the George Reeves Superman, and they had never met. So you had, you know, these two right next to each other. I mean, it was just an amazing, amazing moment. So Comic-Con changed my life in so many ways.
Also, Scott Smith, Anthony, his brother Shannon, and his sisters Chrissy and Marissa.
Yeah, all five of us.
work, all volunteers.
Yeah,
And
all
you
five.
guys well know that, you know, at Comic-Con you make friends for life. And at Comic-Con, how many families have worked out in the convention, plus people met and got married here? But what George Clayton Johnson told me many, many years ago, of all the science fiction conventions that have been around the country, Comic-Con was his favorite. And you know why? It's how they treated him. Now, back, I wanted to add something. When John was talking about original art, in the olden days, a lot of friends of mine would go to Milt Caniff's home. He'd invite him for the weekend in Palm Springs. And he says, pick out any original art you want. Yes, back in the 70s, big name comic book artists would give you original art for free. Does that ever happen anymore, John?
I'll say this for Walter Simonson. I was at the Baltimore Comic-Con this past summer, and Walter sat at his table for 3 straight days, had a line out the door of the convention, doing free sketches of anybody you wanted. All you had to do was make a donation. I think it was for the Hero Initiative. So he had a big fishbowl there. He said, put whatever you want in there. And he, nonstop from 9 to whatever time they closed, 7, sat there sketch after sketch after sketch, just for charity. So that's as close as I've seen. I remember the first year I saw Neil Adams at this convention charging $20 for his autograph. I was horrified. I've got a little different perspective on it now. But at the time, I was just like, what about these poor little kids that were like I was, that wanted to come up and meet their hero, Neil Adams, or Jack Kirby, you know, or Will Eisner, or whatever, and they won't even autograph it without charging. But, you know, Neil, there's a lot of fine-tuning to that. You know, if Neil would make exceptions for things. But Neil had a very logical attitude that he was a limited commodity. He was only going to be around so long. Unfortunately, as we saw, he was right. And he had to, you know, profit as he could for his family. So, and he knew he saw so many people get their free sketches back then, and then what did they do? There's Mark Everett talks about they get Jack to do a sketch, a Kirby sketch, and the kid would walk around to the other end of the door or the dealer's room and yell, you know, Jack Kirby sketch, $15 right here, right? And it's like, who's going to keep doing free sketches when you see it do that? And it's the same way with eBay. When we were starting to come to the show, you'd see dealers or artists were still doing free sketches, and then they'd pop on eBay that afternoon. So, you know, it's unfortunate it's turned that way, but still, you can't blame the artist for that. And this is, you know, it's still the same family, the same community.
Right.
Artists still love each other, they love their fans.
See, this is the thing about fandom that most people don't know. George Clayton Johnson would always say that him and I had PhDs in fandom. If you want to be a rock star, is Mick Jagger going to be your mentor? I don't think so. But in fandom, writing, art, cosplay, you can always find somebody to help you. But one thing I forgot I wanted to add about Eric Hoffman. Any of you been to the 73 Comic-Con at Sheraton? Carmine Infantino was the head of DC then, and Eric found the Superman cartoons from the 40s. And I was right next to him, and Carmine comes up to him, oh, not mean, but very sternful, where the hell did you get those? You know, because as you know, DC would bury everything, the serial, cartoons, you know, anticipation of the movie, you know, years later. Now we got Sasha here. Sasha, what was it like when you met George Clayton Johnson, and what was it like when Zia was born?
Okay, first I'm going to start off. I was in my early 20s. I had just endured a traumatic event in my life, and I decided to isolate myself from everybody, and I tried meditation. That was my big thing, meditation, self-medication, just music. I listened to a lot of the Beatles back then. And I just remember this one night where I couldn't sleep, and on the television, this is a story I haven't even shared with you, Greg. But I just remember this one night staying late viewing TV, and George Clayton Johnson came on, and they were interviewing him, and there was like a brief moment where he's talking about psychosis and how you're not really going crazy, and it was very impactful to me then. And in that moment, I had recently read The Law of Attraction, and for that brief moment, I'm like, wow, this guy is really hitting the point, like, to me, my soul. And in that second, I just put it out in the universe, and I claimed, like, hey, I gotta meet this guy. Like, this guy feels like a cool dude. And so it was about maybe a few months afterwards where I met somebody, my daughter's father, who happened to know him, and just the universe crossed our paths, and we started conversing about writing. I was actually writing a novel then called The Third Eye, using my practice of my meditation and using my third eye to attract things in my life. And I firmly believe still to this day that I manifested that situation. And yeah, that was very impactful to me. And later on, I became pregnant with my daughter. You can stand up if you want. No, okay. Her name's Xiomara. And the day she was born on Thanksgiving. And, you know, that day's known for Twilight Zone marathons. And so that day, that very moment where she was in my arms, like, the marathon was playing. And I realized that that episode, Kick the Can, was actually written by George Clayton Johnson, and my mind was just like, whoa. So that was very endearing and mind-blowing.
One thing I wanted to add about George probably was the world's greatest cannabis advocate. And anybody that worked Comic-Con security, even Gene Henderson, anybody that worked in Comic-Con security, I guess got closer to George, right? That's it? In some regards?
I got a story for that. Because the one year we used to do a lot of live video from our video room, because another part of those rooms channeling both El Cortez and U.S. Graham was where we slept, in part because it saved the convention a lot of money to not have to have other rooms, and we could also monitor the video all night. So we used to do a lot of live events from there. The one year, which was the year that Timothy Leary came, we ended up doing a live session with Timothy Leary and George Clayton Johnson, each one talking about their alternate reality drug of choice. So Timothy was talking about little candy dots on paper, and George was talking about smoking. And we're doing this live, and in retrospect, we probably shouldn't have been doing that because nobody in that room was over 18, not even us. And we're broadcasting it live. So
That was my favorite. That was my favorite.
it's like,
That was my favorite Comic-Con, the one where Timothy Leary was a guest. It just sounds kind of incongruous, but yeah, he fit right in. But I just want to tell a story about cosplay, how I got into cosplay through the San Diego Comic-Con and Scott Shaw. This is one of the most infamous cosplay costumes of all time, if not the most. And if you Google Scott Shaw as the turd, this can be interactive right now. You can get it on your phone, and you can see what he looked like as a turd. Now, this was a character he created in 1972, and he was excited, and I was staying at his parents' house before we moved on to the El Cortez, and then back on Sunday night to stay at his parents' house again. And he's excited about this character, and he thought, man, this is gonna really put my mark, in fandom. And when we got there, he was very disappointed, and he just kept complaining about how he wasn't getting any respect, and I thought he was great. But after a while, by the end of the day, on Monday, I'm still at his parents' house, and I just kind of got fed up, so sort of jokingly, but just to kind of shock him a little bit, I said, why don't you just go as your character, the turd? Strip down to your boxer shorts. We'll get about 15 pounds of chunky peanut butter, corn cobs with corn studs, nylon stocking, cover you completely in peanut butter, and you'll be the turd at the World Science Fiction Convention next month. And he said, I'm sick of you, Terry. Why don't you just go home now? So I went home and forgot all about it, but I knew I'd see him at the Worldcon and if things would be cool. And finally, he got so fed up with the Worldcon because he still wasn't getting any respect. On Saturday afternoon, he said, hey man, I'll do that. I'll do it as the turd. I said, I have too much work to do. I can't help you. And this guy I knew who was like a real guy you could just depend on, who was just tangibly involved in comics and science fiction, said, yeah, I'll go get everything, a plunger, all those other ingredients. And Scott Shaw was on his way, and he became the turd's handler. And I had my suit with me, so I said, I'll be the MC, I'll introduce you. So now Scott's, it's 6, 7 o'clock, and people are waiting in line, all these great costumes, and here's Scott covered with peanut butter. And Scott has to keep slopping it onto him because it melts off all over the carpet. It leaves a trail like a peanut butter slug, And he's torturing these girls who are wearing these scantily and see-through costumes, reaching out, his hands covered in peanut butter. So finally, it's our turn to go on. And this is the wildest thing. I introduced him. I said, when Scott Shaw created the turd, he didn't know that it was a real living entity from the bowels of another planet, perhaps Uranus. And then the crowd is just booing so loud because they loved it. They're raising the roof. And I looked at and I looked out at the judges, and there were like half a dozen judges, and they hated it, except at this con, Jack Kirby was a judge, and he is rocking back and forth. Like one of his crap monsters that he used to do. So anyway, Scott comes on, and man, the crowd just goes wild, and he's like running on, chasing me off, and I'm beating him with the plunger, and finally I'm there in the wings, and he grabs the microphone, and he goes, I stink, therefore I am. So we go off.
The third premiere was at the 72 World Science Fiction Convention in LA at the Hyatt, right? The Hyatt House.
No, it was at the Hilton, at the airport. So anyway, since the crowd loved it so much, they had to put us through for the next run-through with all the greatest costumes, of the whole show. One people had worked 6 months on.